We've all heard it before. Indica for sleep, sativa for energy. But what if I told you that this classic divide between indica and sativa is pretty much just a myth? And if you're relying on those labels to predict how a strain is going to make you feel, well, you're missing out on what really influences cannabis effects. In this video, we're going to break down the real science behind cannabis and why that simple indica-sativa split just really doesn't hold up. We're going to talk about terpenes, cannabinoids, and how your unique biology plays a huge role in shaping your experience. So stick around if you're ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about cannabis strains. Let's get into the truth about what really matters when you're choosing your perfect cannabis strain. Hello, my friends. Welcome back or welcome to the channel, depending on your viewer situation. So listen, we've all heard that indica means like indicouch, or it makes you sleep, or it's really sedating, and that sativa strains are super energizing, right? They're uplifting, they give you a lot of energy, they make you want to like clean the house and whatnot. But in this video, we're going to challenge those oversimplified classifications, and we're going to talk about what actually influences the effects of cannabis, okay? So the main factors that shape your cannabis experience include cannabinoids, terpenes, your personal biology, and set and setting. We'll talk about the 4 factors in a cannabis experience and how they define your experience rather than whether or not the package says indica or sativa on it. Part 1, the indica versus sativa myth. Okay, so you've definitely seen packages of weed that say indica or sativa on them, right? And typically we associate indica with relaxation and more sedative effects, whereas sativa is commonly thought to be more energizing, creative inducing, and gets you going. Like you can actually, get a lot of stuff done on sativa. But those two terms actually have their origin in botany. Originally, indica and sativa referred to the physical characteristics and the growing patterns of plants rather than their effects. Indicas were typically grown in colder, more mountainous regions, places like India or Pakistan or Afghanistan, places where it's much colder and there's a shorter growing season. So as a result, indica plants have much broader leaves so that they can capture as much sunlight as possible when it's available. They are shorter, they're more stocky sort of looking. They look more like a cannabis bush than a tall cannabis plant. They are generally higher resin producers, and they have a slightly different genetic than sativa plants. Now, sativa plants typically come from regions around the equator where they are exposed to a lot more sunlight throughout the day, throughout the year. And as a result, they're going to have much longer and skinnier leaves because they don't need to capture as much sunlight as possible when they're growing. As well, the flowering period of a sativa is going to be longer than an indica plant. So an indica plant generally flowers in 12 to 14 weeks, whereas a sativa plant takes 16 to 18 weeks to flower because genetically it's used to having access to the sun at the equator all day long, all year round. So it doesn't need to worry about being quick with expressing its flowers. Whereas an indica plant is like, the frost is coming. I better make sure that I get this plant flowered as soon as possible. So the flowering times are quite a bit different. Now, most cannabis strains that are on the market today, I would say probably 95% of them are hybrids. Growers will go around the world, they'll do like these genetics hunts, and they'll look for new genetics. So different strains that haven't yet been bred or crossbred or worked with by a grower. They'll find these different strains and then crossbreed them so that you have an entirely new strain that is expressed. And many times these hybrids are a cross between a sativa genetic and an indica genetic. So almost everything that's available on the marketplace today in terms of dried flower is a hybrid. Now you can sometimes find a true sativa or a true indica. They're often named after the place where the genetics came from. So a strain like Malawi, which came from Malawi, the country in Africa, would be an example of a sativa, or Acapulco Gold, named after the city in Mexico, Acapulco, where it's from. Afghani would be a classic indica strain that is probably truly going to be like indica genetics, dominantly indica genetics. But in general, most of the strains that you see on the market today, Blue Dream, Girl Scout cookies, whatever it is, you're gonna find that it is a hybrid and has some characteristics of indicas and some characteristics of sativas. Unlikely that you will find true indicas or true sativas on the market today. So if that's the case, and in fact, it's not the plant's genetics that are driving the effects, you're not consuming true indicas and experiencing relaxation and sedation, you're not consuming pure sativas and experiencing uplifting, that's not how it works. And in fact, here's an example. I went to Jamaica a few years ago, and in Jamaica, you can just buy weed like on the beach, right? Like people will just walk up to you with like a giant weed branch and be like, here, $10. And then you buy it and you smoke it. Now, this is Jamaican weed. This was grown in Jamaica with Jamaican seeds. It's outdoor. It is a true Jamaican sativa. And that shit will put you right to sleep if you consume it, especially like when you're tired, like late at night, right? And you're like, oh, I need some weed to go to bed. Even if it is a true sativa, it still makes you tired when the other things that are happening with your personal biology or your setting are like, hey, it's evening, I want to go to sleep. The sativa and indica monikers are not truly indicative of the effects that you're going to experience as a result of consuming that strain. So let's talk about what the actual factors in a cannabis experience are. There are 4 main factors that influence the outcome of a cannabis experience. Factor number 1 is the cannabinoid profile. The cannabinoid profile refers to the amount of each cannabinoid that you're consuming, as well as the ratio of those cannabinoids to each other, right? So a higher THC product, a dried bud that is, let's say, 27% THC, is going to have stronger, more intoxicating effects than a plant that is 13% THC. THC is the intoxicating cannabinoid. It is the one that really alters our perception and changes our experience and our perceptions of the world around us. Now, there are other cannabinoids, of course, like CBD, which modulates the effects of THC. We've also got CBG, we've got CBN, we've got CBC, we have THCV. So there are lots of different cannabinoids. The amount of the cannabinoid in the product or in the strain, as well as the ratio of that cannabinoid to the other cannabinoids in the strain, that's going to be your number 1 factor, okay? That's your number 1 influencer. The more THC you consume, the more sedating the product is going to be. I'll say that again. If you have the exact same product, if I have a little bud and I go out and I use my one hitter and I have one little bowl of it, I'm going to have different effects, a different experience than if I go out and smoke an entire 1 gram joint of the same bud, right? The more THC I consume, the more sedated and relaxed I'm going to feel. If I smoke a 1 gram joint right now, I'm probably not going to be able to continue doing this video. I'm going to need to lay down and take a rest and get my life back together again, because smoking a 1 gram joint at 10 o'clock in the morning would not be me having my life together. At least not on a recording day. Another day would be fine, but not on a day that I was recording videos. There would be a problem in my life if I did that. Okay, so the number 1 factor that is influencing the cannabis effects is the cannabinoid profile. Now, the number 2 factor that's going to influence the cannabinoids effects is going to be the terpene profile. Now, you've probably heard me or someone else use this analogy before, but if you consider a cannabis experience to be like taking a drive in a car, then the cannabinoids are like the engine. They determine how far and how quickly you're going to get to some other point, the point of your cannabis experience, the point of being altered, whatever that looks like for you. Whereas the terpenes that are in your product are like the steering wheel. They are going to determine whether that experience will be uplifting, like a sativa experience, or more sedating, like an indica experience, or what you think those experiences are. There are terpenes that are common to uplifting strains. Terpenes like limonene, terpinolene. Those are very common in uplifting strains. Sometimes alpha pinene you'll see as well. There are terpenes that are common to more sedating and relaxing strains. You're gonna sometimes see linalool. You will likely see myrcene. You may very well see beta-caryophyllene, and you might see humulene. Those are all terpenes that are generally more sedating and that will cause more relaxation in the consumer. In addition to thinking of it like a car and a steering wheel or an engine, you could think of it like a band, like a musical group, where cannabinoids are like the lead singer, while terpenes are essentially the rest of the band. Change the terpenes and you change the music or the experience. For example, let's take this classic weed example, Snoop Dogg. There was a point in his life where Snoop Dogg rebranded himself as Snoop Lion. and said, I'm only going to make reggae music. And so for a period of time, Snoop Lion just made reggae music. We are familiar with Snoop Dogg, who made rap music or hip hop music. The singer is the same, but the band making the music behind the singer, totally different. So the terpenes, you can think of the terpenes like the band. Terpenes could be a reggae song or they could be a hip hop song. Those are two different styles of music, even though you've got the same singer in front of you. So terpenes really change up the flavor of the experience. Dried bud is one thing. To think about having terpenes in dried bud. You just break it open, you smell it. Yep, they were in there. They were there when it dried. They stayed there when it cured. If you've got a product with a good cure that was cured well, 30 days in the dark or so, then it should have some of the original terpene profile left in it. So dried bud is pretty easy to capture the terpenes in, but sometimes we see indica and sativa labels on edibles. So what's the deal with that? Many modern extraction processes, like supercritical CO2, which is the process that's used to make distillate, does not retain any terpenes. The temperatures used in a supercritical CO2 process are far too high for any terpenes to be retained. They're almost like isolates, right? So depending on how clean the product is, you're going to end up with a high percentage, 90 to 95% of a cannabinoid or some cannabinoid profile, and then the rest will be like plant matter or lipids or waxes or things that were remaining from the plant that are no good. But there are not terpenes that are native to a distillate. Now, you can have cannabis inputs that are more full spectrum, things like live rosin or hash rosin or hash. Those are inputs that are commonly used in edibles that do contain some of those native terpenes because a lower temperature process was used when those concentrates were extracted from the plant. So if you're thinking about indica and sativa in edibles, you want to look for something that was made with a full spectrum input. Hash rosin, live resin, something like that will contain native terpenes that can have an effect when you consume them dietarily. However, most edibles are not going to have an indica or sativa effect. They're just an edible and they're delivering the cannabinoids to you through your digestive tract. It's not necessarily the same as with a dried cannabis experience. Now, there is some debate about whether or not inhaled terpenes in something like a vape pen actually have efficacy and contribute to the effects, whether they're uplifting or sedating. We do know that on a molecular level, a terpene is a terpene. It doesn't matter if it came from the cannabis plant or if it was botanically derived from somewhere else. The structure of a terpene is the same, so it should act the same way with our bodies. However, there is some debate about it. We don't really know if adding terpenes back into something like a distillate before you put it into a vape pen has the same effects, indica sativa effects. It might. It's one of those things that we really just need a lot more research about. One of the most negative impacts of prohibition was that we have a dearth of research about how cannabis works with the human body. We already know that it's very individual, that the way cannabis works with each of our bodies is very individual. And the way cannabis works for me is not going to be the way that cannabis works for you. But we don't have a lot of research to help us identify in advance how cannabis is going to work for someone. So hopefully that's something that actually we see more of in the next few years. But it is one of the reasons I am so hopeful for federal legalization of cannabis in the States, in the US, is so that we can start getting some research, because this is super important stuff. Cannabis is a powerful product. It's a powerful medicine, but only if you know how to use it the best way for you. Okay, so factor number 1 in a cannabis experience was the cannabinoid profile. Factor number 2 was the terpene profile. Now, the third factor in a cannabis experience is personal biology and unique response. Everyone's endocannabinoid system, their genetics, their tolerance levels, their prior experiences are going to influence how they feel when they consume cannabis. Let's go back to that car analogy for a minute. If the cannabinoids are the engine and the terpenes are the steering wheel, then each person's driver brings unique biology and personal context that shapes their experience. The role of the endocannabinoid system is to help each of us maintain homeostasis, to maintain balance within our body. And what we need from one moment to another is going to change. What I need to stay balanced today will be different from what I need to stay balanced in a week. What I need in the morning is different from what I need in the evening. Your body is constantly changing and shifting and adjusting, and the endocannabinoid system, its role is to respond to that, to keep everything balanced and happy. So because of that, the way your body interacts with cannabis is going to be based on the state of your endocannabinoid system and your personal biology in any moment. When you consume cannabis, you are increasing the molecules that connect with your endocannabinoid system. That's why things happen when you smoke weed, why your eyes get red, why your sense of time changes, why your perceptions are different. It's because you are altering the chemistry of your endocannabinoid system and your body. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But it's important to understand that that's what you're doing. And that's why you need to experiment and keep track of your consumption experiences, keep track of your experiments, so that you learn to identify exactly what works for you in the best way possible. What you need is going to be different from what someone else needs, and what is going to be different from what you need at another time. Now, if you're someone who has female hormones, then this is especially important for you because your endocannabinoid system interacts significantly with your endocrine system and with your hormones. Most women or people who have female hormones have a 28-ish day hormone cycle. And the way that your body interacts with cannabis at one point in that cycle will be very different from the way it interacts with cannabis in a different point in that cycle. That's why it's so important to keep track of what works for you and when, so that you can go back, you can look at the patterns and say, oh yeah, when I have my period, I often want this kind of weed because it makes me feel better. Or when I'm in my luteal phase, I want this kind of weed because that's different. Your personal biology is so impactful on your cannabis experience. So impactful. If you're interested in learning more about that, I do have a video on cannabis and hormones that you can check out. And we get deep into the science of both male and female hormones and how cannabis can interact with your hormonal cycle. The first factor in a cannabis experience was cannabinoid profile. The second factor was terpene profile. The third factor was personal biology. And the fourth factor in a cannabis experience is set and setting. Your set refers to your mindset, which is your mood and your expectations going into the experience. And your setting refers to the consumption setting, the place you're in, the people that you're with. For example, eating a gummy right before bed is going to be different than eating that same gummy. The consumption setting makes a big difference. If you've ever smoked a joint at home and then left and gone out and you're like, holy cow, I am suddenly so high, that's because you changed your consumption setting, right? At home, you were relaxed. It was kind of normal. And now you're out in like the Shoppers Drug Mart and it's so bright, all of these lights and like, what is happening? I'm so high, right? That's because you've changed your consumption setting. And mindset, of course, obviously is going to influence your outcome. If you're in a calm and positive space before you consume, you're going to have a more relaxing experience, right? If you're super stressed out and you're struggling with anxiety, you might have a more anxious experience, right? It's all going to impact how you perceive the outcome of that experience. Your mindset going in is crucial. It makes a huge difference. And that's for everything, not just for smoke and weed. It's part of everything. It's important for all of it. Now, we also have to talk about the placebo effect because your brain's expectations can absolutely shape the experience, and sometimes as powerfully as the product itself. I read recently about a pain study that was done on dental patients. Now, if you've ever had dental pain, you know it's garbage. There's like nothing you can do about it. You just have this pain in your face and you can't get rid of it. You can't distract yourself from it. It's just there all the time. And it's really challenging. It's really bad. Dental pain is not good. So in the study that they did, that I read, dental patients who were in pain, who were experiencing pain, who were going to have some procedure done. And in half of those patients, they administered a shot that actually had, some kind of pain relieving drug in it, whatever they use for dental pain. And those people, as you might expect, begin to experience relief almost immediately. Now, in the other half of the patients, they administered a placebo. So they told the patients they were administering a pain shot, but in fact, they administered like saline solution or something that was totally innocuous. And what they found was that over half, I think it was 57% of the people who had received a placebo experienced pain relieving effects because their brains actually started producing opioids to reduce the pain that they were feeling. Their brain said, oh, I know what this is. I understand that I'm going to get some pain relief. I can enhance this and produce more pain relieving molecules as well. Okay, that's remarkable. Over half of the people who received a placebo experienced pain reduction because their brain did it. Their brain made it real. Your brain is incredibly powerful. Your brain can absolutely make things happen. So, because of that, cannabis producers put the words sativa or indica on a package to prime your brain to think that this is going to be uplifting if it says sativa or sedating and relaxing if it is indica. Let me say that again. The labels on the package are placebos. They are there to help you have an expectation of the kinds of effects that you are going to experience. Now, are they based on a terpene profile? Potentially, yes. If it has a very uplifting terpene profile, it is more likely to give you sativa-like effects, uplifting effects. If it has a very sedating and relaxing terpene profile, it is more likely to give you indica-like effects. Similarly, if it's very high in THC, it's probably going to be more sedating. If it's lower in THC or has a more balanced THC to CBD ratio or has CBC in it, it's more likely to be uplifting. All of these characteristics impact the outcome of your experience. Cannabinoids, terpenes, personal biology, and set and setting. Placebo effect is part of all of those because it prepares your brain for an experience. Part 5, moving beyond indica and sativa. Okay, so what are you supposed to do now that you're on the inside club of knowing that indica and sativa labels are quite frankly bullshit? Well, the first thing that you can do is they're not necessarily completely bullshit. You can use them as a first step. You can say, I'm looking for something relaxing. I will look at products that have indica written on the package because they might be a better place to start. But what you're going to want to focus on are the cannabinoid profiles and the terpene profiles rather than the indica sativa labels. If you don't know about uplifting and sedating terpenes and terpene profiles, you can ask a bud tender. There will almost certainly be someone in the shop who understands terpenes and can help you figure out which terpenes would be best suited for the experience that you're looking for. Or if not, you can just Google it. Leafly's got articles, Level Up has articles, there's all kinds of stuff available on the line. Uplifting terpenes, Google. Sedating, relaxing terpenes, Google. You'll find them, you'll find information. And then keep track of what you're consuming, because then you can look back and go, oh, you know what? Every time I consume humulene, I actually find it super uplifting. I don't find it sedating at all. That's important to know, right? Your experience is going to be unique to you. It's important to know how you interact with terpenes on a biological level. Someone told me the other day that every time they consume humulene, they start sneezing and coughing. That's good to know, right? Because then you don't consume products that have humulene listed on the package. So this is why keeping a consumption journal is so important. And if you don't have a consumption journal, or if you're not sure how to do it, I've got a link to a free one in the description of this video. You can download it. You can use it for yourself. You can print it out. You can write it into a notebook, whatever works for you. But keep track of your consumption experiences so that you know what works for you. At the end of the day, you've got to be an informed consumer. You really have to be aware of the limits of packaging and labeling. We don't have a lot of information on the packages. In some markets, you might get packages where producers are saying this is good for this is good for that. But you know what? Cannabis is so personalized to each individual and to each experience that it would actually be super challenging to predict the outcome of a cannabis experience for every single consumer who tried a product. It would be impossible, really. So you're best off making your own decisions and understand that, those words, indica sativa on a label, they can only give you so much information, especially if you're looking at an edible made with distillate. In that case, you know what? It's just an edible. It's just going to be cannabinoids. You're not going to have terpenes in there creating a steering wheel for your experience. Understand that edibles are a different beast entirely, and they don't necessarily act like dried bud does. You can also look at lab results if they're available. If you can find lab results, take a look at those, because then you can see if the product has full spectrum properties. Does it have different cannabinoids in it, or does it just have THC and CBD? Does it have trace amounts of terpenes in it, or are there none? nothing left. The COA, the lab test result, can give you a lot of information if you can get your hands on it. Sometimes producers will put it on their website and you can take a look at it. I always like to look at the COA if possible. I think I'm actually going to do a video coming up on how to read COAs, how to read lab tests, because they can be kind of confusing and long. So it's important that you know how to read the information that's available to you. So I'll do a video on that coming up. The bottom line is this. Indica and sativa labels are rooted in plant biology and in industry marketing rather than you're best off exploring your own preferences and identifying your experiences with different strains, understanding how they worked for you, if they were uplifting, if they were sedating, what kind of effects you experienced. Keep track of that so that you can look back and see what works for you in what ways. If you enjoyed this video and made it to the end, thank you very much. Please be sure to subscribe for more content like this. If you enjoyed it, share it with somebody who you think ought to know about indica and sativa because they're still using it to purchase products. So you want them to be a little bit more educated. And give it a like if you thought this was interesting and useful information. I would appreciate it. So until next time, take care of yourself and stay curious.